Okay, recording is going. All right. Well, good evening and a very warm welcome to the Junior League of Toronto's first ever JLT Black History Month celebration. For those of you who don't know me, I am Terry Less. I'm president of the Junior League of Toronto. A very warm welcome to everybody. And a shout out to our potential new members, those of you that are joining us, to the Junior League of Edmonton and Calgary members, and of course to Dr. Cukier. Thank you to the Junior League of Toronto's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for all your work to make this evening possible, and for arranging for our fireside chat with Dr. Wendy Cukier. We are fortunate to have this opportunity to learn from and engage with Dr. Cukier on how to be an ally to Black women in our workplace and in our junior league space. I'd like to take a step back for a moment and thank the DEI committee, formed just at the start of the summer, for creating awareness and conversation about what we as members of the Junior League of Toronto can do to make our space one where every single woman feels welcome, supported, encouraged to grow and participate, and has the same opportunity to lead and develop. Your work is not easy, and the conversations you facilitate take us to places where we are uncomfortable, and that's okay, because from the discomfort comes growth. You have started us all on a journey, and I applaud and encourage your work. Now, on a personal note, through our discussions, the books, the articles, the podcasts you share, and every single training event you organize, I have learned of my own white privilege, of things I need to do better to support BIPOC women in my workplace and in our junior league space. I've learned that there are things I could have done better, not said differently. I am definitely a learner, and I am humbled because the more I learn about racism, the more I realize there is so much more to discover, both externally and in myself. Thank you to each of you for joining tonight, for traveling on this journey, and for your vulnerability and honesty as we go down this road together. I'm eager to learn tonight and to use our collective knowledge to make positive change, both at the Junior League of Toronto and in our community. This truly is our mission in flight. Thank you, Dr. Cukier, for bringing your energy, knowledge, and guidance to the members of the Junior League of Toronto. I turn us over now to Maggie Cheong, who will do our land acknowledgement.
Hi. I acknowledge with humility and respect that I live on Indigenous land. The land I occupy is situated in the Dish with One Spoon territory, the original territory of Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, Wendat, and Haudenosaunee peoples. I acknowledge my role, complicity in, and benefit from the settler state. As an uninvited guest on this land, I am grateful for the opportunity to live here. I say these words to make space to acknowledge the inadequacy of words themselves, and as a reminder to take active steps towards decolonization and supporting Indigenous sovereignty.
Thank you, Maggie.
Pauline, would you like me to start the video? Or
Pauline, would you like to introduce the video and then we can start it? Okay, I can introduce the video. I'm happy to do that. As we are celebrating Black History Month, what better way to start than for us to watch a video about Viola Desmond. Viola Desmond was an entrepreneur, a mother and a wife who lived in Nova Scotia, and was had a family that had been in Nova Scotia for hundreds of years. And through her example, we can find strength. And we want you to watch this video to see just how much of a trailblazer she was. If you could start the video, Terry, thank you.
No worries. Let's. Can you see my screen okay?
We can see it.
All I wanted was to see a movie. One down, please.
I can't sell downstairs tickets to you people.
How dare they? I could afford to buy the more expensive ticket. I run my own business. But they refused to take my money. They left me there all night. On what charge? They said I didn't pay the theater tax. But it was really about color.
Sister Desmond, appeal this conviction and your community will stand behind you.
Do you have any idea what this will do to us?
So what are you going to do? Make it right.
Viola Desmond's case inspired Nova Scotia's civil rights movement. She was pardoned 63 years later based on the injustice of her conviction.
This evening, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Wendy Cukier. Dr. Cukier is the Diversity Institute founder, academic director of the Women Entrepreneurship Hub, Knowledge Hub, and research lead of the Future Skills Center. She's the co-author of the bestseller Innovation Nation, Canadian Leadership from Java to Jurassic, and former VP of Research and Innovation. The Diversity Institute has 100 research staff, 100 research associates from around the world, 200 industry partners, and focuses on dimensions of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, future skills, and the entrepreneurship and innovation. Harnessing the power of innovation, it promotes the advancement of underrepresented groups. The Diversity Institute is also a research lead for the 3 million Future Skills Center and the 8.6 million Women Entrepreneurship Hub. Wendy has been recognized with the Harry Jerome Diversity Award, the Bob Marley Award, the Canadian Pakistan Business Council's Female Professional of the Year, the Metropolis Research Award, the CATA Alliance Sarah Kirk Award for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and 100 Powerful Women by WXN. She has been named a YWCA Woman of Distinction and one of the International Women Forum 2020 Women Who Make a Difference and Women of Influence, and one of 100 alumni who shaped the century by the University of Toronto. Wendy holds a PhD, an MBA, an MA, and honorary doctorates from Laval and Concordia. It is my honor to welcome Dr. Wendy Cukier to the GLT.
Wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Welcome, Dr. Cukier. We are so excited to have you with us today. And, you know, just looking at the work that you've done, I've had a chance to just, you know, take a glance at some of the work, and it's incredible to see the focus and just how you have made it so clear and easy to read for people like me, but also businesses to see how diversity is a real asset, not just on a personal level, but just it makes just business sense. And the work that you're doing is absolutely amazing and actually very easy for just your lay person to be able to read and understand. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to begin, Dr. Cukier, with asking you, I think a little bit of a controversial question, because that was a question that came up during our discussions in the DEI, our DEI committee conversations. And it's, you know, we're talking about, you know, specifically Black women today. And we know that, you know, there are a number of racialized women, lots of racialized women across the board who certainly can be and should be supported. But why is it, do you think, that intentionally supporting Black women, you know, is it excluding other women?
It's a great question. And, you know, part of the reason my bio is so long is I'm old. And I've been doing this for a really long time, 30 years actually, since the Montreal Massacre. You know, that's exactly the question that people asked when we said that women should have a seat at the table, right? You heard, and I remember Glenn Sims, I don't know if anyone is old enough to remember her. She was one of the first leaders of the Canadian Council on the Status of Women. And she said, you know, everyone's talking about reverse discrimination now that we're fighting for equity. Nobody cared when it was discrimination. And I sort of, you know, I kind of feel the same way. And I think, you know, when with the opening remarks and the talk about privilege, I'll tell you a couple of things that just sort of made me realize that I really need to pay more attention to this. The first thing was, and normally I talk with PowerPoints, but I think I can remember the stats. The first was a project that looked at employee engagement, and it was a very large study with Catalyst. I think 18,000 respondents. They worked at IBM, they worked at the banks, and so on. And there were simple questions, simple questions like, do you feel you're held to a higher standard than your colleagues? Or my company tends to promote people of their own ethnicity. And what was so stark to that point in time, and this was about 2006, I think, I'd focused primarily on gender issues, right? What was so stark was in the results, and it was a very large survey, was that there were differences between white men and white women, for sure. There was evidence that women felt that they were disadvantaged because of their gender. But the differences based on race were profound. So on questions like, I feel like people promote people of their own ethnicity, white men, 9% of white men agreed, 33% of Black men agreed, and about 30% of Black women. I feel I'm held to a higher standard in the organization than others. There were differences. Women, and you know, this is irrefutable. Women are held to higher standards. You know, they what's it called? The likability quotient. I know a woman who was head of a big firm. She hit all her performance goals, and her boss said she wasn't sufficiently likable. You know, most women get told to smile. Women who exert leadership are called bossy. Never in the history of the world has a man ever been called bossy, because it's just assumed that men are bosses. So I do not at all want to minimize gender bias, because, you know, I've been working on that for 30 years. But that research showed me really clearly that while there was evidence of gender bias, the differences based on race were far greater in terms of people feeling excluded. So for me, that was one data point. The second one was in about 2008, we did a study of leadership in the Greater Toronto area. And we looked at women on boards, and we looked at racialized people on boards. And of course, we found that on corporate boards, women were underrepresented, and a lot of us had been working for many years to increase the representation of women in leadership roles, increase the representation of women on boards. City of Toronto, half the population is racialized. White women outnumbered racialized women 17-1 on corporate boards. 1-1 in the population, 17-1 on corporate boards. And so for me, those were two really strong indications that if all we did was replace the white men with white women, we were just reinforcing, historic problems. And of course, you can look at similar data for Indigenous people and so on. This year, for the first time, we unpacked the data because, as you know, after the George Floyd killing, there's been way more attention specifically on Black people and how, that category of racialized conceals a lot of differences in the experience between someone who identifies as Black and someone who identifies as Chinese. We looked at more than 1,600 corporate boards across Canada, 1,600. We found 9 Black men and 4 Black women out of 1,600 corporate board members, right? So, to me, the data is really important. And of course, we have explanations. And of course, there are these factors and those factors, but the data are so stark on the differences in the experience of white women and racialized women, and then specifically Black women versus racialized women, that I don't see how anybody can in good conscience ignore those facts. And the idea that making space for others diminishes your piece of the pie, to me, is silly, because the evidence is so clear. If we do a better job on diversity and inclusion, everybody benefits.
Well, in your research, Dr. Cukier, as I said, I was very captivated by it. I'm looking at the statistics for the city of Toronto specifically, and the Black population is 7.5%, and Black people on boards of directors is 3.6%. But the Black people on boards and the corporate sector is 0.3. And then I think about, well, of that 0.3%, how many of those are women? 0.3, that's kind of like almost nothing, right? So,
well, when you think it's 13 total across the country, only
right.
Women across the country.
Mm-hmm.
The math is terrible, but I think those stats are really, it's not that people are moved to action because of data, but I think for me, the data is really important to make clear that this is not perception or one person's bad experience or all in our heads, right?
Right.
I say the same thing. There are no more men called Michael who are CEOs of companies in Canada than there are women. So, the data is so clear.
Right. What's also troubling is just looking at the statistics on school boards, and we know how important education is. For many racialized people, education is the stepping stone. That is the way you are able to lift yourself out of socioeconomic deprivation. And when we look at your research, Dr. Cukier, we see that only 2.9% of Black people are even on our trustees or on school boards. That's horrible.
Well, it's horrible when you look at the leadership and the results of, and it's too bad Mohammed Elmi, my director of research, isn't here, because he's got some great stories. And we've done, everybody, you know, I know there are a number of people here are teachers and principals and so on. The data from, and credit to the Toronto District School Board, it's one of the only boards that collects race-based data on student experience. And if they didn't do that, we wouldn't know about the appalling differences between Black students, other racial and white students in terms of, you know, performance, expulsions, and so on. And the streaming issue, which, you know, I have to give credit to the provincial government. Getting rid of streaming will, in my view, make a difference. And Mohammed Elmi, who's got a PhD from the University of Cape Town, which is a very prestigious institution in management science, tells the story of how when he was growing up, he's from Somalia, he came to Canada when he was 12. When he was growing up, his teacher said, you know, Mohammed's having trouble with math. We think we should put him in the lower level math. Had he been put in the lower level math, he would not have been able to go to university. Right? And too, lucky for him, his mother was a Tiger mom, and she just refused to let them downgrade him and pushed and pushed and pushed. And he ended up with a PhD. And most of his work is quantitative. So very kind of visceral example of how the data play out.
So with that being said, Dr. Cukier, if you were a non-racialized woman and you were to support a Black woman, how does that translate into supporting all women?
You know, it's honestly, I didn't prep very well for this, and I saw that question and I kind of choked and thought, like, you know, honestly, I don't know. I'm a white woman, so I don't know what's useful, quite honestly, in terms of supporting Black women. I'll tell you some of the things I think, you know, that I try to do, which I think perhaps are useful for some people. I mean, one is the data. I think that the research validates people's experience. Like, people know that there's something wrong, but when you show them the stats, and this applies to women generally, but especially racialized and Black and Muslim women, you show them the data, suddenly it's clear that it's not all in their head, that these are real things that are, that it happens to a lot of other women. So for me, the research is important. For me, responding to what I'm asked to do. So for example, Nadine Spencer, who's the head of the Black Business Professional Association, you know, she needs stuff. She needs funding for a program. She needs, you know, speakers for an event. She needs help placing students. She needs whatever she needs. You know, I just try to listen and I do what I can within my sphere of influence. So I think open to responding to people's requests and listening is really important, because sometimes what you think people want or need is not necessarily what they want or need. And I guess, you know, the only other thing that I do is I do make a point, and it was actually Paulette Senior who sort of emphasized this when we were together on the board of Women's College Hospital. We knew we wanted increased diversity on the board, and we knew we wanted to recruit more racialized women. And she sat me down and she said, no, Wendy, it's not just racialized women, it's Black women. You make sure that you get more Black women on the board. And she was one of the first people to tell me that I really needed to not lump all racialized women together, that I had to pay specific attention to what was going on with Black women. And, you know, since then, I do pay attention. You know, I nominate Black women for awards and the Senate and, you know, prestigious women's clubs and so on. In fact, I only now nominate racialized women for those roles because it's so obvious that, you know, organizations like the International Women's Forum, which is, you know, an elite women's group, so white, so embarrassingly white, that, you know, we had to do something fairly concrete to change.
Thank you. And so, you've segued nicely into allyship and into my next question, which is, what does allyship look like in the corporate world or a typically white-dominated environment? What might that look like for us?
I'd actually like to turn the question around to just that last question. What would be helpful to the Black women who are around the table? Like, what is it that that would make a difference in your life? Like, what should we be doing or thinking about or trying to help with before we go on to the next question? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just...
Okay, well, that's fair. It's fair. So you're asking what would be helpful to Black women. Well, I can't speak for all Black women, but what I can say of myself is that if you are supporting a Black woman, you are supporting a woman who is highly qualified. We're not going to, it's not like you're supporting someone who doesn't have the skills for the role. You can be confident that who you're supporting is someone highly skilled and highly committed and is invested in doing well. Like in fact, not just doing well, but exceeding expectations, and will do whatever it takes to do so. I think if you are supporting a Black woman, you are supporting someone who will not just support Black women, but will support other racialized women and white women. I can say that for myself, that I'm in a position to hire. I do look to support, yes, Black women, of course, and Black men, but if there is someone who is highly qualified, regardless of their race, I certainly will support and I will mentor. So I've got, a number of people that I mentor that, range ethnicities, and there are white people that I mentor. So we would, mentor talent as what we're looking for. So if you support a Black woman, you are supporting everyone.
I think that's really helpful. And it made me think of one other thing just before we go on to the next question that I think is super important. And that is that one of the most pernicious barriers that all women face, but especially Black women, is with respect to stereotypes. And I was really, really glad that you talked about Viola Desmond, because I remember over a year ago, we were doing an article on women, Black women entrepreneurs for Black History Month. And it was hard to find public profiles of successful Black women entrepreneurs. And I forget who I was talking to. It might have even been Mark. I'm not sure, because I was sending out notes saying, give me some names, give me some names. And someone pointed out Viola Desmond, and I went, oh, yes, of course. But I think the issues around stereotype busting and role models are really, really important. That's why I love the Harry Jerome Awards. And I think that we have to constantly showcase the achievements and successes of Black women. So we're launching, in fact, tomorrow, a See It, Be It campaign where we've profiled a bunch of women entrepreneurs generally across sectors. And we made a very deliberate effort to overrepresent Black women, Indigenous women, and other racialized women because they are so absent from kind of our public consciousness. So that was another thing that I think, those of you who are in positions of power, when requests come in for someone to speak or to be interviewed, not just in Black History Month, but around, you want someone who's going to go on the agenda and talk about political trends. Like there are ways to help give more Black women, more racialized women visibility and make space for them.
Can I just also add, sorry, Karen, in terms of what women can do, women of power in places of business and in their circles, that, I think oftentimes there are phenomenal women in those spaces and they don't get invited. They don't get invited to the tea parties. They don't get invited to the cottage, and I think part of your responsibility, if you really want to elicit change, is that you put out the invitation. When 4 women get up and say, let's go for lunch, and there's a Black woman, you know, in the office, and nobody ever says, hey, come out with us, then that's a problem. And so sometimes it's the little things that you can do that will really change the culture, because once you step out, you know, and extend that invitation, then other women are open to that. They're like, okay, like I can do that too, you know, and it just takes the first person to make a step. You know, as Karen said, mentoring is so very important. You know, give someone else an opportunity, because they're craving for it.
I agree, Marcia. And I think too, that once they have that opportunity, it's really important to support them through the new role that they have, right? Because once you get in the role, you know, as a Black person, you're going to face what, you know, society calls now microaggressions, which is a nice way, I say, of, you know, racism. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of opposition. There is, it's a challenge to be in that role when you get it. And so you need people to support you, to help you to navigate some of the treacherous water, to encourage you and let you know that even when you are being unfairly criticized or not supported, that you are doing a good job, despite what racism comes your way, or people projecting unfair stereotypes on you, which aren't really true, but they are doing it anyway because of our socialization, that you are there to mentor and support that person through that new role, and to help them to see that they're valuable, they have a lot to offer, and to help them to navigate those minefields. And so going on to, you know, and I love what you're saying, Dr. Cukier, about changing the culture, because if you are not making a concerted effort to actually overrepresent sometimes, to make that extra effort, you're not really gonna shift anything. And so, you know, how can we shift the norms and expectations that are present in white dominated places? So, you know, when, you know, Black women are in white dominated spaces, and I'm sure you've heard, and you did say that the research shows that they feel like they have to be someone different. They feel like they have to be more westernized. They have to be westernized. They have to speak the Queen's English. You know, and so they don't feel like they can be their true selves. So what is it that, Dr. Cukier, you think that we can do to help women to be their authentic selves, not, you know, emulate European tastes or speech patterns or even body language, to be themselves and to feel comfortable in doing so in the workplace?
You know, it's such a good question, because, you know, this issue is an issue for women generally, and it's obviously amplified for Black women. But I'll just give you one example, and then while I think of an answer. I was at you know, I don't know what it was, Canadian Club something lunch, and no one's ever really accused me of being a girl. Like, I wasn't socialized like normal women to be, you know, deferential and modest, and you can tell because I talk a lot and don't apologize so much. But I was at this lunch, and a CEO who I knew, a woman, very accomplished, very gracious, very likable, was giving her speech. And her speech was on the Internet of Things, a highly technical subject, which was appropriate because she was the CEO of a tech company. But the speech went like this: the Internet of Things is so important in our new economy. Manufacturing is being changed dramatically. And what I realized, did any of you watch the presidential debates when Hillary Clinton was was running, and it was obvious someone had tried to train her to be friendly. And so she started talking about her pappy and her grandpa and baking cookies and smiling a lot. And what I realized was this woman, despite being very, very accomplished, had been sort of beaten into submission so that she had to smile all the time. And if the man had done the same thing, you would have thought he was absolutely mad. So that whole, so all I can do is generalize based, you know, kind of talk about my experiences being a woman in sort of tech male dominated environments and the kinds of pressures that you feel to sort of fit in and behave certain ways. And I think that we have to become more aware of some of these things. Because as I said, you know, the research shows really clearly 2 people, same environment, observing the same behavior. One thinks it's fair and open and meritocracy, and the other thinks it's incredibly biased, racist, and so on. And so when you have such different perspectives on what's going on, all you can do is continually try to raise awareness of, you know, I know in terms of gender, the kinds of microaggressions that women experience, you know, the echo chamber. You're sitting at the table, you say something, no one pays attention. 5 minutes later, a guy says something, everyone goes, oh, what a great idea. And that's an experience that a lot of women have. But what I have been told is Black women experience that kind of invisibility way, way more, where they it's not even acknowledged. Especially if they're the only one in a particular environment, that kind of invisibility and lack of attention, which a lot of women experience, is amplified when it comes to Black women. And similarly, I think there's an analogy, you know, I'm of the generation where we all had to, you know, have our hair tied back and wear suits and flat, sensible shoes. And, you know, because if you dress too sexy, no one would take you seriously. And so it created huge sort of identity issues for a lot of women who were trying to be more like the guys than the guys, especially in sort of male dominated environments. And the level of discomfort can actually make you sick, right? Trying to feel, and there's lots of research that not only does, you know, anti-Black racism cause stress and can result in depression and mental health issues, but it causes physical changes as well. Constant that constant effort. And I think, you know, the other analogy I think of is people who are LGBTQ2+, who have grown up in environments where they had to conceal their identity day in, day out, act in a certain way and fabricate, you know, elaborate narratives in order to conceal their sexual identity. So I think that's the only way I can understand it, is sort of by analogy, because obviously I haven't lived it, but the research is really clear that this is a thing, it's a problem, and that the only way that we can really combat it is by creating safe spaces, talk about it, and getting trained to observe it.
So I'm going to just quote from your research, because your research is amazing. And here's a quote that you included. And this was from one of the participants. And here's a quote. What I came to recognize later was that it was harder for me to integrate into leadership positions because there's a whole part of me I kept very separate from work.
Yeah. And another, you know, another thing is educating people. Like an example of what I would not see, but 2 different, but Mitzi Hunter and I think Paulette Sr. both mentioned this exact same case where they came into a room or they met someone or they did something, and the person said to them, "My, you're articulate." And what they hear is, "My, you're articulate" for someone like you.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And I wouldn't, honestly, I would not necessarily have observed what the impact of that was had they not told me. Separate occasions. You know, similarly, the get it being touched, you know, "Oh, your hair, like, what is that? What is that hair?" Right? A lot of Black women talk about how people paw at them and play with their hair and do all sorts of things that they would never do to anybody else. You know, they're so like that if people don't tell you about, it's not that I go and, you know, play with people's hair, but I would not necessarily observe that and read it in the same way that the person it's happening to experiences it, if that makes sense. And
it does.
I think that happens a lot with gender. You know, like I said, bossy. Never in the history of the world has a man been bossy, ever.
Right, exactly.
Karen, Karen, can I just touch on two pieces? One of the things that you didn't speak on was the backlash that women actually experience when they deny their womanhood and try to be more manly in those environments as well. Huge backlash from other women, you know, because they're trying to fit in.
It's a real double-edged sword, right? And, you know, I just know from my own experience, because I'm a bit like I'm on the kind of male stereotype end of the spectrum. And I have been astonished. Like, I'm not very hierarchical. You know, I talk to everybody, I hang out with everybody. But the level of disrespect that you observe, you know, like I'm someone's boss's boss, and they'll still write me emails that are just like wildly inappropriate because I'm just, you know, kind of one of the girls. And you talk to women in very senior corporate environments. And one of the really terrible things is that men don't like working for women, but women don't like working for women either. And
that's right.
Women surgeons have a lot of problems with surgical nurses because the gender stereotypes are so very profound. And I can only assume that if you're a Black woman leader, you're fighting both the gender stereotype and the race stereotype, and you're going to get it like you know, if you're too likable, no one's going to take you seriously. If you're too strict and sort of stern or authoritarian or what's the word? Definitive or results oriented, you're going to get it. And it's like you're sort of, you know, if you conform to the stereotype of a woman, then you're not a leader. Try to mimic the stereotype of leader, then you're not a woman. And as I said, I can only assume that if you add race to that, it's even worse. And I say that in part because we just did a couple of competitions for Black women entrepreneurs, and a lot of the women who had chosen to opt out of corporate environments did so because of the endless experience of racism, microaggressions, unfair treatment, feeling like they had no opportunities, and so on and so on and so on. So, you know, again, I haven't experienced it, but I think, as you said, Marcia, the research is pretty clear that those stereotypes of what a leader is like really have huge impact on us across the system.
And that's so much the reason why we're having this conversation today, Dr. Cukier, because it's one thing to get to that space, right, which is difficult in the first place because you've shown us the statistics. But once you're there, it's the pressure, it's those stereotypes, it's the racism, it's exhausting. And so if you do come across someone who's racialized, what can you do as an ally? And I think we've said that, it is being a support. It is really seeking that person out and letting them know, I see the work you're doing. But I see the human being that you are, and I feel that you're valuable enough to make a connection with. I feel that you're valuable enough to invite to lunch, to invite to an after work function. It's those things that are so important, because it can be incredibly isolating and lonely when you are in those positions. And I remember reading, Dr. Jean Augustine's reflections on her time when she was in the federal government, and she talked about the loneliness of being the only Black woman in that role, that even though you're there, it's wonderful, it's an achievement, but the loneliness, being ostracized, not being part of the boys or the girls club, is really difficult. And it really gives a Black woman pause to pursue that, because that once you get in there, you're not going to have a lot of allies, and it's difficult. And life is short. Sometimes you wonder, should I even embark on that? And those are not the kind of decisions that those are not even the kinds of things that we should even have to be thinking about. And on top of it, it's that being a person of color, dealing with that, but also dealing with being a woman, it's compounded. So when we're talking about allyship, it's recognizing the person who's in that role as a human being, who needs support, because you don't know what they're going through, but this conversation is helping you to know there's a lot they're up against in their role. They're not telling you, it's not showing, but you have to know that they're dealing with racism. You have to know that they're dealing with sexism, and those two compounded really have an impact on their wellness, their mental and physical wellness, as you mentioned. So that's one way, another way of being an ally, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's important for everybody to be conscious of, the kind of, they say that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance, and especially the environments. And I know Jean Augustine not as well as Marcia does, but I know her a little bit. And being the first, the only, is really challenging. And that's, it's interesting because OCADU, I don't know if people saw the decision they took. They called it a cluster hire. They knew they had a problem with, how white the faculty was, especially because the students were more diverse. So they made a commitment to hire 5 Black faculty at the same time, as opposed to just one, who then would be really outnumbered. And this idea of building critical mass, they've said that for many years about women. One woman on a board is not going to work. You need at least 3. And I think the same principle applies to Black women and racialized women. And I think that was the message that Paul Cukier was trying to give to me was, no, you're going to get Black women and more than one Black woman on the board. And it was good she did that. The other thing that comes to mind when you were speaking, I thought you might raise, is the other thing is that often we expect Black women then, where they're really outnumbered, to do a lot of heavy lifting around, we have the anti-Black racism committee, and we have the this, and we have the that, and we have the this. And I know I hate being you know, the representation of the girls and the gender police all the time. And oh, we need a woman, let's put Wendy on that committee. And I can just imagine that becomes a real problem when you're so outnumbered in some organizations. So you keep getting asked to speak on behalf of Black people, or asked to do a lot of unpaid labor in order to help the organization look good, feel good, you know, whatever. And even as much as I say, you know, we want to showcase and profile and give Black women opportunities to shine, that can result in a lot of unpaid work. And you see this with Indigenous women too. I do some work with Corey Wilson, who's at BCIT, and she is so overstretched because every single thing where they need a well-educated Indigenous lawyer, it doesn't pay her, right? She's still got a regular job to do. Every single committee on Indigenous students or whatever, she's pushed into. So I think that's another thing that we have to recognize, is trying to strike that balance between giving people space to tell us what they need and to share their views, versus just adding to the burden, because Black women are already facing barriers and being held to higher standards, and you know, all of the things all of us have to deal with. And then you add to that, you are the representative of your race, and you are the person. It's you know, the burden is crushing, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Cukier. I want to go now to the chat. We've got some questions that have been posed. And the first question is in reference to representation on boards. So the question is, do you feel there's alignment with the number or percentage of board certified individuals who are on boards, or is there encouragement to enroll in the course?
So interesting. And I'm hoping that Robert's rules apply and nobody is going to report me. But I have actually argued, I was, you know, an organization I work with was putting together its recruitment strategy for board members. And in it, they put ICD certified. And I said, no. I said, ICD certification costs $20,000, right? $20,000. So if you're not already part of a corporation that invests a lot of money in staff, chances are you don't have the resources to become ICD registered. There are other pathways for people to have the knowledge. I'm not saying you shouldn't have the knowledge, you shouldn't have the skills, but you don't need to pay $20,000 to get it. And they may not like me saying that, but one of the things that, in fact, it was turned down, but one of the proposals I was working with BPPA on was basically trying to develop kind of executive ed and board training for Black and racialized women that's free because and trying to get large corporations to donate services in kind, because a lot of Black women are self-employed for reasons I explained, or they're in nonprofits. They may be executive level, they may be leaders, but they're not as likely to show up in the VPs of, you know, large consulting firms and banks. If you are a VP in a large consulting firm or bank, there's a whole set of wraparound supports you get to develop your leadership skills and support your leadership skills and so on. And I think that those are invisible barriers to very well qualified women who happen not to be in the corporate sector. So we're trying to figure out ways to get some of those resources and make them available for free. Because, you know, I just, if your corporation will pay for it and you want professional development and you want networking, go ahead and get board certified. But you don't need to do it in order to get the knowledge that's required to be successful on a board.
But see, when you talk about that, Dr. Cukier, that's a systemic barrier, right? To development and being able to attain some of those roles, right? It's when we talk about systemic racism, here's a very good example of that. Yeah. And it seems so benign. It just, it's just $20,000. You get that and you can be on a board. Well, no, it's actually not just that. It's much more. And why is that in place in the first place? Is my question, right? A big barrier. So next question. How can women of privilege, white women, fully understand the effects of their white privilege on Black people? And how can they break the cycle of white privilege within the family unit? I feel like white people think that with a nod of the head and listening for a short time, all of a sudden they understand their white privilege.
I think it's a really good question. And, I think that, I personally think that privilege takes a lot of different shapes. So I completely accept that white privilege is an important thing that we have to recognize. And we have, we run, like I've never been stopped without reason by the police. I don't get followed around in stores. I've never had the police called on me because I was using the washroom at Starbucks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's just, the evidence is absolutely clear that there's privilege associated with your skin, but there's privilege associated with other people. Like if both your parents went to university, that's a kind of privilege. If you didn't have to work 25 hours a week to pay your tuition or to pay your tuition and help contribute to your family's living expenses, that's a kind of privilege. If you are allowed to, hold hands with your significant other in public and not worry about being beaten or killed, that's a kind of privilege. If your parents both had more than grade 6 education and could help you with your homework and understood the value of university and knew what an engineer was. Like I found out what an engineer was after I had a master's degree in history and was working with them. I thought an engineer was the guy at the back of the train that we waved to at the level crossings. And so, an example, there's one of the first Black women to graduate from University of Ottawa Law School told me a story about how, one night the dean of the law school called and said, tomorrow's the deadline for applying to be a clerk at the Supreme Court of Canada. And you didn't apply and you're one of our best students. And she said, oh, my mother was a secretary. I went to law school so I wouldn't have to be one. Because she didn't know a clerk at the Supreme Court was like prestigious. I wouldn't have known that. My mother was medical secretary. My father died when I was just before my 10th birthday. So I'm very sensitive to obviously to white privilege, but I think we also have to recognize socioeconomic status in particular, and these other dimensions of privilege, which have a profound impact on people's social capital, access to networks, knowledge of the unspoken rules, how to navigate, do all these things.
Yeah, and I think that informal network is so important. I mean, that is how 90% of people get their jobs, is that informal network. It certainly isn't through ads or the internet. It's who you know and what they know, and it's making those connections. And as Marcia said, without having relationships with people, you are really never going to have access to those informal networks, which is really where you get those opportunities. And so, that question that was asked, how do we, women of privilege, white women, understand their privilege and how do they support? Well, it's reaching out and having Black women in your network, making that effort to make them a part of your network. Certainly from an organizational or business perspective, but also socially. You want to promote, you want to support people that you like and and they're your friends, right? It just makes sense. And if all your friends are just white, then it's going to be difficult for you to do that. So, and then understanding the effects of white privilege, it's having those conversations with someone. You're not going to understand it by just reading a book. You're not going to understand it completely through this training event. It's having a relationship with someone, and it's not a superficial relationship where you're just gonna, you know somebody for a month or so and you start asking these questions. It's building a relationship. And so if that's something you're interested in doing, then you need to make that investment in someone who is equally interested in having a relationship with you. Because one of the conversations we had in our DEI committee, it's like, Black women, we've got our friends. It's not like we're begging white women to be our friend. we're good. So it's not a, feeling sorry for, it's being genuinely interested in having a relationship with someone who doesn't look like you, and then building that trust over time. And it takes time. And then perhaps it might be an appropriate time to ask those questions to understand how you can be more supportive. So there's another question that's in the chat. Are Black women and people of color compensated less than white men and women for doing the same job?
Oh yeah, I mean, the wage gap is well documented between men and women. And then when you layer in race, indigeneity, and so on, the gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger for similar reasons. So it's occupational segregation. Racialized and Black women are more likely to be in occupations that are low paid. It's underrepresentation in leadership. Racialized women and Black women are less likely to progress up the corporate hierarchy. It's negotiations. Often there are ranges with salaries, for instance. And I can tell you for sure, because I've been in those positions, men come in and you offer them something. It's like, maybe, I don't know, I'll get back to you in 2 have another offer. And what about the car? And what about my golf membership?
Yeah, the bantering.
Right? And a woman gets offered a job and it's like, oh, you like me, you really like me.
Right.
And that's amplified, right? Because of the experience of racism and exclusion, that honestly, I think, Black women in particular are much less likely to negotiate, make demands, and so on. And the problem is when they do, because of those stereotypes,
exactly,
they're going to be punished. So it's a very complicated situation. But yeah, there's no question. Equal pay for work, work of equal value does not exist. And some of you may know there's actually Courtney Betty is leading a court case, right, like a civil suit against the federal government for historic discrimination against Black people, very much like some of the court cases that focused on the gender gap.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just interject for a moment? So you had talked about burnout, the burnout that Black women experience, because oftentimes you're the only one. And so everything gets, the committees, the acts, the presentations, what have you. One thing that I actually wanted to share was that since being a member of the JLT, Jonna and Lori are really the ones that kept me in the league, because they were always like investing in me, like encouraging me, like, making time to say, hey, Marsha, what's going on, what have you. And as a result, I have been led to invite Karen to the league and Kyla to the league. And so because as much as I love the league, I did not want to have that burnout, even though there are other Black women, but I didn't want to experience that burnout. And for me, I just think we also have a role to play. We can, to take responsibility and to step in and not kind of shy away because of some of the fears that we have. But, for other women, Black women who are new to the league, and I'm seeing a few women that I'm not familiar with, I want to encourage you to, create allyship within the JLT, because I have found it very rewarding to be a member. And as a result, I have been able to extend myself, like to have Dr. Augustine and Wendy come on board, because I really believe in what we're doing, because I see the long-term impact.
Well, I think, Marcia, I mean, that's a really good point. And so, you know, that brings us to what are some blind spots that we might have as an organization. And, you know, I think it's wonderful that you've been mentored the way you have and people have reached out to you. I think it's great. But I wonder if that would be the same experience for someone else. I wonder. And then, so the question to Wendy is, we are a women's organization, and the goal, a huge goal of ours, is to have more diverse membership, and to have more Black women, but to be more diverse, because to some extent we are, but there is definitely room for improvement. But every organization has blind spots. And you've worked with women's organizations, and you've talked about, you know, the whiteness of organizations, et cetera. What are some things that we need to be looking at that we're not seeing, perhaps, that may be barriers to creating that inclusive environment and to encouraging or making an environment that, you know, Black women want to be a part of?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I do a little bit of work with boards, but every board is different. So, you know, obviously in the current environment, looking at representation levels is a piece, but also looking at engagement levels. So, you know, doing board surveys, anonymous board surveys where people can tell, you know, speak frankly about what they experience, what they like, what they don't like, in a way that is, you know, and sometimes if it's a relatively small group and you don't want, you know, if there are only 5 Black women, it's pretty easy to figure out whose responses are whose. So sometimes you want, you know, a third party to kind of do that sort of assessment to get the informal feedback, because it is so, I was on one board where there were 3 Black women at the time, and they were so sick. They were so sick of having to always go, race, we have to talk about race. That what they would do is before the meetings, they would call me up and they say, okay, Wendy, here's what we want you to say at the meetings. And so what that taught me was that a lot of people feel that they can't actually say what their experience is or how they're feeling, because, you know, as was said earlier, you're trying so hard to fit in. It's kind of like being squeezed into Cinderella's slipper or something, you know, a size 8 foot in a size 6 shoe. And that creates, you know, a level of discomfort and stress. So trying to figure out how to surface the things that, you know, someone like me might or might not see that are going on, you know, who's getting to chair the committees, who's getting to make the decisions, whose voices are being listened to. Because you can have, and we know this when we have men at the table with women, you can be at a table but be invisible. You can be at a table but nobody listens. You can be at a table but nobody solicits your opinion, or they let you talk and then they do something different. So really digging into, and this is true in corporations, not just board, but digging into those culture things, hugely important. And, you know, thinking about everything from your mission and your goals and your strategy up through a gender and diversity lens that, excuse me. So when you think about, here are the activities that we're going to do, asking, you know, and I experienced this, and I think, as I said, it's a class thing with me. It's not a race thing, but like, I don't golf, and I'm never going to golf, and I don't want to golf, and I don't want to learn to golf, and I shouldn't have to. And so, you know, what I found in some of the boards I was on, the ladies who lunch, you know, they belong to the golf club with their hubbies, and they would build big social things around activities that for them were just normal, that were actually quite exclusionary, because only a segment of the population would engage in those activities. So sometimes boards, you know, whether it's their fundraising approaches or whether it's their social activities or whether it's how they recruit, sometimes they do have blind spots. And the only way to figure them out is systematically You know, let's look at our policies. Let's look at our statements, website, who's in our brochures. What are the activities that we're doing? And are those activities including all of the people that, that we want to include? I don't know if that makes sense, but to me, it's, you know, you develop a strategy, and every element of the strategy you have to apply a gender and diversity lens to.
And how do you do that? So Wendy, you know, it seems a little abstract, that diversity lens, you know, bringing that to what we do, to our mission, our vision, you know, our practices. How do you really do that? I mean, we have a committee, okay, that's great, and we're doing great things. I like that, that's nice. But in terms of actually changing how we do things, how do we systematically look at what we do, how we hold our meetings, what we talk about, you know, everything? How do we look at it from that lens? I don't know how to do that. We talk about it, but I'm not sure how we actually go about it.
Well, it's funny because we have something called a diversity assessment tool, and I thought I have it here somewhere. I don't know where it is, but it really is like, it's 100 questions, and it's, you know, do you have a skills matrix? Do you have a mission that says these things? You know, how do you set your priorities? Do you have a policy on this? Do you have a policy on that? How do you do your outreach? How do you make decisions, et cetera, et cetera? And so that's kind of a starting point, is just systematically going through, you know, what it is you do, and asking the question, are there people that are not going to participate? And I don't remember, I think Marcia, you might have been at an event where this is a different dimension, but is kind of an interesting example. So, you know, I bought tickets, a table at an event, and it was an event that was primarily organized by people from the Caribbean. And I had brought along some Africans, some people, you know, immigrant newcomers from Africa, who were interested, highly accomplished, educational, and well-educated, and so on. And one of them was one of my PhD students. And she came away from the thing with like her eyes bugging out of her head because it was so Christian. What she observed was it was really, really Christian, and she was Muslim, right? And so things that we might, you know, you know, you go to a party and they're serving ham and cheese sandwiches. A lot of people aren't going to be able to eat those, or having a cocktail party during Ramadan, you know, or on Yom Kippur. Same kinds of principles that apply to other dimensions of diversity, I think, can often apply to the Black experience and other groups. Like, I don't know sort of the backgrounds of other people on the board, but there may be other dimensions of diversity that people are not comfortable sharing or talking about, where they feel excluded as well. So it is really, I mean, it's just work, just systematically going through policies and procedures and activities. And, you know, organizations that have Christmas parties, for example, kind of are sending a signal that only certain kinds of people are going to be welcome. And there was, I was on a call with somebody who said that one of the first things he did was, you know, shift the Christmas party to a holiday party, and suddenly all the Muslim staff started showing up. Stuff like that. That makes sense, but
yeah, it does. And so, you know, Dr. Cukier, we are unfortunately near the end of our time, and there are just so many questions, but I have a burning question for you, and it's part of your research. And, you know, we're going to talk about, like, we're talking about numbers. How does an organization benefit from, and I'm talking about a corporate organization, any organization, benefit from including, hiring, promoting, supporting Black women, women of color? Give us the hard facts.
Yeah. And so, you know, I don't actually have data specifically on hiring, promoting Black women, but there's lots of data in general on diversity and the impact of diversity on corporate performance. And there's no question that organizations that do a better job at having more diverse leadership boards and so on perform better. And why might they perform better? Well, because they have more insight into what customers, citizens, clients, whoever they're serving need and want. They have more innovation and ways of thinking about things, and they're better equipped to attract the best and the brightest. And, you know, my example I've been using lately, which I think is kind of fun, is a company called, I think, SheerTex went for venture capital funding and, you know, pitched the product, and the guys went and didn't give it money. The product was pantyhose that don't run. And so I think, you know, that's just such a good example of how if you don't have diversity, you miss opportunities.
Absolutely.
And I think we can, you know, we can extrapolate that. As you said, like in Toronto, I think the Black population is 7 or 8%, but there are lots of people who care about what happens. And so if you screw up on this, there are also risks, right? Look what happened to Starbucks. Look what's happened to the RCMP. Look what's happened to the healthcare system with very high profile incidents of racism.
Right.
Various forms. You can destroy an organization's brand. So there are advantages, but disadvantages to screwing this up. And I think, you know, we're very much grounded in the business case. And it just makes sense. Like if you are excluding big chunks of the population, you're not getting access to the best talent.
That's right, exactly. And so there definitely is not just a moral case, but certainly a business case for that, for sure. And so, Dr. Cukier, what I want to say to our participants today is your website is amazing. All this information is there. It certainly is an education for all of us to understand with the current circumstances of women, particularly Black women, women of color, in terms of their representation in the corporate world, but also to understand the business case for that and a lot of the research that went behind it. So I would encourage you to look up Dr. Cukier. It's really an education. So thank you, Dr. Cukier. I could speak to you on and on. We really could. But we're going to say thank you so very much for your time with us this evening. We really enjoyed it. And as you can see, there were lots of good questions in the chat, and we had a great time together, the DEI committee, formulating these questions based on the work that you do. And we appreciate your time, and we sincerely hope that you will visit us again soon. There's more to talk about.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you, because honestly, I didn't know a lot about the Junior League before I got invited to this, and you do fantastic work. I'm going to just make one ask. I put a thing in the chat box. The federal government has launched something called the 50-30 Challenge. For organizations that aspire to gender parity, which is 50-50, and increased representation, which is the 30%. And they're trying by Sunday to have 1,000 people sign, 1,000 organizations, SMEs, NGOs, whatever, sign up. And I think they need about 80 people. So if you have a company, if you have an organization, if you know someone, please get them to sign up, because for me, it's a really interesting initiative that's trying to really push the envelope. And corporate Canada, especially, that we want to see action, not just talk.
Exactly. We do want to see action, not just talk, right? And talk does, and action actually translates into supporting Black women, women of color, in everything that you do, right? And that is our mission, part of our mission, a very important aspect of our mission at the JLT. And thank you for shedding so much light. And we're definitely going to sign this. So thank you for sharing it.
Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of the evening, Dr. Cukier. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you for your time and giving me space.
Thank you. Okay, so what we'd like to do is just have some time for reflection as Junior League members. So what we've done is we have just a very important reflection question that we'd like you to think about. And if you are so inclined, you can include it in the chat. So here is the question. What resonates the most? What resonated the most for you tonight as you were listening to Dr. Cukier share personally and about the research that she's done, as well as some anecdotes from her own experience? What resonates most for you? So if you can think about that and share that in the chat, we would certainly be interested in seeing your responses. It will give us a lot of opportunity for dialogue, for ongoing dialogue. These are great. Thank you. Well, please keep your reflections coming. Okay, these are great reflections. Well, I'm respectful of your time and we are mindful of the hour. Before we close, I just want to extend a sincere thank you to our amazing DEI committee. We are, as you can tell, a very passionate group of women. And I am so proud to be a part of this committee with women who really care, who really want to make a difference. It's really been a pleasure. And we've been together since August. And I have to tell you, we've done a lot since August. We have been busy ladies, motivated ladies, and busy because this is important. This certainly is part of our work as the JLT for sure, but it also is impacting, you know, our community. These are conversations that we need to have, and the the conversations which lead to action are going to, our hope is to support women and communities that clearly need us very much. And so I want to recognize the amazing women that are on the DEI committee in no particular order. Jen Masiak, Pauline Lyons, Alma Lekic, Maggie Tiong, Jess Murphy, Marsha Brown, Jonna Smith, and Nadine Spencer. It is just very humbling and just a great, it has been a great experience, working alongside all of you. It's always a learning opportunity, and I love your passion. And we are hard workers. We work hard, and we're perfectionists. And so tonight we give you the work, the culmination of the work that we've done this year. And we encourage you, if you're interested, please, join our amazing committee. We're certainly open to more members that can help us on our journey. So we just want to thank all of the committee members, and thank you for participating. And thank you, Terry, for being tech lead tonight and opening us up in such an amazing way. Thank you so very much. It has been a great evening, and we appreciate also our JLT, our leagues from Edmonton and Calgary. Thank you for coming. And we are more than happy to work with you and support you in your DEI work as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. The more, the merrier, right? Together, we really are better. So don't hesitate to reach out. So with that, we bid you,
Karen.
Oh,
Let me
yeah?
just interject. Thank you, Karen, for being our fearless leader, for stepping in, and for just the amazing work you have been doing. We appreciate you so much. So thank you. And just a reminder that Wendy put her email in the chat. As she mentioned, she does work with boards. So, I mean, for all you amazing women that are here, and for those who didn't participate, spread the word. She has some incredible information and has done some fantastic research that can move many organizations forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. And thank you so much, because without you, we wouldn't have had Wendy tonight. So we are very grateful for your contributions in that way. Thank you so very much for all the back, behind the scenes. I gotta tell you guys, we're a great team. I tell you, we really are. We couldn't have pulled this off without everyone really pulling it together. So thank you, everyone. And we appreciate the well-attended event tonight. So we bid you a wonderful rest of the evening, and see you soon, we hope. Take good care and stay safe, stay healthy, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.